Hey, and welcome to Blood and Dice. We're here to help you enjoy all aspects of role-playing, whether as a player or as a dungeon master. In this episode, I'll be going through character creation. I should also at this point apologise for the potential variation in sound quality, as we've had to record this session over Skype, so it's a bit of a learning curve, so I apologise for that. And I have the pleasure to introduce a good friend of mine, Richard. In case you're wondering, we are maintaining social distancing. Richard is a comfortable 10,089 kilometres away. Richard, you'd like to just say
buddy.
hello? And I know you've been playing D&D for quite a while, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been... also, first of all, hello. Thank you for having me. Well, I've been playing it off and on, to be honest with you. I used to play it when I was in my early teens, but recently I've been playing it for about 18 to 2 years.
1866 then, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much, mate. But yeah, I've been playing it for a good while now.
Are you familiar with any other system other than D&D? I know I was talking to you earlier before we started this about 10 Candles, which we'll go into later on.
I've played a couple of different systems. I'm not probably as experienced when it comes to different systems as you are, Dan, but I've played 5th edition. I've played, I think it was the second edition, maybe even 3rd edition. Played Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and the one that I'm most recently really enjoying at the moment is Lamentations of the Flame Princess. That's the one that I'm playing at the moment a lot. Because
my mate Dan was the first person I ever played D&D with. I don't know what edition it was. Must have been about 1998. So I have no idea what version it was. So the next episode, actually, guys, is going to be a beginner's guide to DMing. So we're going to walk you through how to running a game and setting everything up if you hadn't done that before. So let's get into it. Generally speaking, obviously, everyone has their own way of creating a character for games. And it depends how they like to play. It depends on the games themselves. Obviously, some people like to really optimize attributes, having a really high AC or DPS. Again, guys, I will do a brief glossary in the description for some of the terms which we might mention during the episode, and also some of the links for things for some of the apps or websites that are available for character generation. Now, personally, Richard, I prefer to create characters for role-playing rather than doing it based on stats, which obviously I know yourself are more into sort of that side of things, with backstory and motivations and things. So, Richard, how would you go about creating a character now if I was to ask you to create one? Would you go through the player's handbook and just run through, or is there something...
It's a bit of a strange one for me because I'm a little bit more unorthodox when it comes to my character creation. If I was looking into building like a character for a one-shot, as you just said, I always try to inject a bit of my personality into some of the characters that I play. Oh, yeah. And I think that's a really important aspect when you're making.
It's unavoidable as well, I think, as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unless you're Daniel Day-Lewis or something like this, you're not, you're not going to be able to sort of fully immerse yourself into the character. And when people have asked me about role-playing and whatever, and they're like, what exactly is it? I've always liked to describe it as advanced pretending.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Yeah, it's like as you grow up and you're playing things like cowboys and Indians and whatever, it's sort of, it's like that, but just more,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's just a bit more to it. If we come back to the example that you was given, I would usually go for something that I would have fun role playing and enjoying in one session. I mean, if you're comparing a one shot to like a campaign, for example, I think if I was building a character for a campaign, I would thinking. Yeah, I would certainly think about more about the optimization side of things.
So the fact that sorry to interrupt you, but let's say if sometimes you come up with a one-shot character and you think, this is going to be so much fun, and then you start playing it and you're like, I just kill this guy.
But ironically, since you said that, I did play in a Lamentations campaign. Well, I'd say it was a long-running campaign for a couple of my friends, but I was introduced just to join in for one session, and I made a character based on I think it was one of the old Warhammer classes from one of the RPGs that they have, and it was. Right. It was called the Ratcatcher, and I literally called him Bastard the Ratcatcher, and I based the whole character on just him wanting to go around and catch rats and just constantly just be throwing, like, he had like his mother's brassiere as a sling and that kind of thing. And it was such a fun character to play that I was almost throwing him in front of creatures that I thought, yeah, I'm definitely going to die, but I'm just going to have fun doing it. And it was such a good character, and ironically I survived the session, and I ended up saying to Brian, who was the DM, I said, please keep the character because I just had so much fun playing it. So sometimes these disposable characters that you kind of come up with for one shots and things like that, they can almost have a very special place in your heart when you're playing.
They sort of end up having a life of their own, don't they? Sort of. Almost. You just completely just pick up and run with it, and that's the wonderful thing about role playing, that you can just have these moments. Again, it's up to the player themselves how much they want to go into it. I mean, if you were going to do a campaign like you say, you could spend days, weeks coming up with elaborate backstories and motivations for your character. One thing I would point out, obviously, if it's going to be more for a campaign, you're more likely to want to speak to the other members of the party and the DM and work out something that is going to work with the team that you're with. Because obviously, if it's a one-shot game, like you say, the wacky sort of characters that you come up with are great if it's a one-shot, and it doesn't matter if they're more or less useless. If you've got 5 bards wandering around. Sort of like a lot of these that we've had like ideas for, and we've been like, wouldn't it be great if we did this? And it'd be just logistically, it's like it would be a really bad idea.
Like I knew that game that I played, I was cannon fodder. I knew I was, but I completely 100% agree that if you're going to be doing a campaign, like, you need communication. You can't. You need to have this kind
the whole
of
game. I mean,
absolutely.
Again, gonna depend for yourself. Like you say, you're more sort of familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, but there's so many different games that are out there. Dungeons and Dragons, GURPS, Stars Without Number, 10 Candles, as you mentioned, and they've all got their own methods for character creation. We'll go into this in a second about 10 Candles, because 10 Candles is unusual in that it doesn't actually have character sheets.
I'm incredibly fascinated by it. You've just introduced me to it a couple of hours ago, and I've been looking into it, and I'm just absolutely fascinated with the it's obviously very narrative driven in terms of these characters, and there's very much a shared kind of concept about it, and that's what I love about it.
I'll put a link in the description to the website for 10 Candles, and also one of the sites that I use a lot is, I don't know whether you're familiar with this site, Richard, but Drive-Through RPG.
Yes.
There's loads of stuff on there for all different RPs. It's got resources for maps, for characters, for different sheets that are available. There's loads on there, so I thoroughly recommend you check that out. But 10 Candles is one. Dread is another one, which I mentioned in the previous episode. Rather than having a sheet with different characteristics on, it's mainly just a backstory. You would discuss these things with the DM. The DM isn't necessarily going to allow you to be sort of a ninja or something, too crazy. 10 Candles is one of the most fun games I've played, and of course it's a zero prep game as well. If you're stuck one night and you're like, we should play something, and you don't have all the stuff there, as long as you've got 10 candles, some bits of paper for writing things down, you can play 10 Candles. It's a really good game. For some games, if you are going to do a campaign or whatever, you want to have some more setup for building your character. I know myself, generally speaking, especially if it's a campaign system for people that aren't so familiar with the game, I would run what's known as a session 0, and that would help to familiarise the players with the premise of the game system if it's new to them, the setting, any sort of house rules that you might want to introduce.
I've done a few session 0s myself. I'm recently running, as I've said, a Lamentations of the Flame Princess campaign, all homebrewed. Instead of actually running a session 0, I actually ran one of the modules as like a one-shot, and I pre-made several characters.
That also works as well, yeah.
Yeah, and ironically, my campaign's a bit of a splatterpunk campaign, so characters are quite frequently changed, to be honest with you, but there's one character in my campaign that is still not dead from session 1. Still going, and it literally...
One eye and
Yeah, it's
Half and half.
just literally Bob the Fighter. That's literally his name, and he's still alive now. So some of these characters, that like I treat that almost like a session zero. Like if they wanted to make a character for the following, like session one, essentially, I'm happy for them to do that and that kind of thing. So there's different ways that you can introduce characters into the game, and but session zero is obviously an extremely go-to way and the very effective way of introducing characters.
If you've got any sort of these old characters lying around for things as well, they're a good resource for having NPCs or sort of escalating the stats to make them bosses, So you've got one that's lying around that was good fun to play, and you go, actually, what happened to him? And you can keep the backstory there, because the backstory is that character that you played previously. But now he's sort of, what's that phrase?
You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
We mentioned as well that there are character creation programs and apps and things that if you're new to RPing or you're new to the system or what have you, that there is assistance there where you can just type in a backstory or a couple of stats and it will help you sort of generate that character from scratch. In fact, D&D's got an official one called D&DBeyond, which I'll put a link down in the description. What's your feelings on the pen and paper versus digital? I'm more old school. I prefer a sheet of paper.
I've played a few campaigns where we've used like our phones or like an iPad or something like that. I'm very much pen and paper, but I am an environmentalist at heart, so it does bother me ever so slightly. I am very much a traditionalist.
That's just because you're using pen, Richard. You should be using a pencil. You can rub it out.
Thanks, Dan. You're going to keep that one in, aren't you, mate? Yeah, like for sure. Like I think, funny enough, I've actually joined a campaign I made. We had our session 0 yesterday, and we're using D&DBeyond as a resource to because we're going to be playing it online. So we're using that to make our characters and that kind of thing.
That is certainly something to mention as well, especially with the COVID around at the moment and a lot of countries. I mean, England is still in lockdown. There are multitudes of programs that are available to help with that. So Roll20 is one that is very well known.
Fantasy Grounds is another one I've heard of as well, I think.
That might be something to do in a further episode. I don't want to make it sound as though that we're sort of old fuddy-duddies playing on stone tablets or something, because I'm all for technology. I love to use technology in my games and sort of, and that will definitely be in a further episode in using technology for immersion, music and sound effects and what have you. But it's just, you've got to use these programs to familiarize yourself with them, because I've used D&D Beyond a few times, and every now and again I have to say to someone, how do I expel the spell slot? Where do I put this? And it's sometimes I find it a bit break immersion a little bit when you've got to do that.
I think to practice and experiment making characters and things like that, I think it's excellent. I think like you can just toy around with different races, different concepts of characters. And I've got a good friend. He goes through the whole process about 20 times before he settles down on a character. I'm very much like, I'm going to play this. I'll do this. Roll the stats, done. Whereas he will experiment left, right, and centre.
I mean, it's all to do with, again, like I say, familiarization. So if you're used to playing the game, whatever system it is, you can just be like, right, I'm going to play a Dragonborn Paladin, because you know all the stats, you know exactly what their buffs are, what works well with them. Whereas, I don't know, let's say, for example, you were going to play a game that you were unfamiliar with. You'd have to sort of read through everything first. The other thing, of course, is that if you're playing, with a group of people, and the DM will help you if there are things that you're unfamiliar with, and just speak to the rest of the group and be like, okay, actually, guys, I'm unfamiliar with a monk, how do key points work, and all these sort of things.
I think that's an important thing to say, that you'll have a good DM that will be more than happy to go through and help you through the construction of a character, and especially if you've got people that have played it before, they're always going to be happy to help. That's just the role-playing community. I find that tends to be the case.
Yes, especially if it's people that you've played games with before. The opportunities for creating a character are endless. Essentially, it's your imagination. Another saying, there's nothing new under the sun. Everything's already been thought of already.
Absolutely.
I mean, you're more than able to sort of grab things from TV, from film, books. Let's say you've got a dwarf cleric.
Yeah.
You could base him off of one of those sort of 80s cop shows. It was like calling Ace Thunders or something. Danger is his middle name, like Gene Hunt or Axel Foley or something. He's a maverick, a loose cannon who plays by his own rules. But like I say, it's you can grab them from anywhere, as long as you're not sort of doing a sort of a whole cut and paste, as it were.
Yeah, by all means, there's nothing wrong with doing it like where you have an elven or like a wood elf ranger or like a human fighter, like you do the whole Lord of the Rings kind of thing where you like copy
and
like,
my axe.
Yeah, pretty much. I don't think that's bad, but I certainly as a player or certainly and also as a DM, I like to see characters that are off the wall, off the cuff, completely against the stereotype or archetype of certain different types of builds. Yeah.
You run the risk of, if it's a stereotype and it becomes sort of almost cliche to have like a surly dwarf with a sort of a Scottish accent or
wielding a two-handed hammer. I've took part in a campaign not that long ago where I literally made a kobold arcane trickster, I think it was, a rogue. But this is a point that I would really like to bring up, where I rolled so badly on my stats I had to give him an intelligence of 6. But you can still use that.
That's slightly more intelligent than the pot plant.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, like I think a cat had more intelligence than he did. This is the thing. As much as high ability score rolls when you're making a character is obviously a great thing. Like if you roll like 3 18s, you can be dumping up and down because you've got you can slam it into strength, dexterity, and constitution. You got yourself a blinding fighter. But I think that people need to realise as well is that if you get a low roll, like a really low roll, don't get upset about it. Embrace it, hold on to that, because it can be an absolute gift when you're role playing. I think it could just be excellent. And like, don't be daft and chuck it like a roll of 5 into charisma for a bard, but just try to implement that role into something where you're going to get these possibilities of incredible role play capabilities. And I think that can be like a backhanded strength almost.
Yeah, I mean, I would say nothing is off limits. If I'm a DM and someone says to me, okay, I've got this idea, and I'll use your example there. So I've rolled these stats, and I've got a really low score here, but I had an idea to have a bard, but a bard that is absolutely tone deaf, and and actually put his charisma down to something like you say, like 5 or something. But you make up for it in other ways. And it just so happens that maybe you give him something like the lucky skill or something, so that
re-roll his
exactly. So he's absolutely terrible at it, but somehow he just manages to sort of
get by the skin of his teeth. Yeah. It's like that's the thing. Like there is so many as much as it can be due to with your ability rolls and how you roll the dice and whatnot, it like the feats that you can choose or the different archetypes of certain characters or certain classes that you can roll with, that can really bring a character out into its own, and it's awesome.
Like you say, the archetypes that are included in the player's handbook. A lot of the handbooks for various game systems that are available, most of them have a section in the back of the character creation where you've got like archetypes or whatever. But if you're looking through those and you're like, no, I don't really like any of these, you can always speak to your DM and say, like, actually, do you mind if I take a bit from this one and a bit from that one?
I think it's incredibly important to have some degree of flexibility. Like, as long as your party and your DM's okay with it, if you have that degree of flexibility, you can make it your own.
Exactly. I mean, Gary Gygax, the guy who made D&D, he always said, that the rules are there as a guideline. The DM is there to sort of just guide the players through the story.
I agree.
You're there to have fun.
Absolutely. That's the whole idea of it. As long as everyone's having fun and everyone's playing what they want to be playing and everyone's enjoying the game, then ultimately that's all that matters.
We've gone through a bit now about stat generation. What's one of your methods of sort of generating actual backstory? Do you come up with it last minute, or do you sort of put a lot of sort of effort into working out sort of a whole history? And
it kind of changes from time to time with me. I mean, I'm quite impulsive when it comes to my character creation. So it could be literally like, I've got an idea, and then I'll flesh out the story before session 1 happens.
So we'll have the session. I've got pads everywhere for DMing.
I can imagine.
And one of the things I do like to do is if I have an idea for a character, for a trap, for something, I will try. If I'm near a pad, I will write it down. There are various pads that have just got like magic weapons, or an idea for an NPC that is or a pub called the Bell's End or something like that.
I have got untold amount of Google Docs online, and it's a nightmare going through it because I've got stuff wrote everywhere. NPCs, characters, towns, cities, everything. It's everywhere. But I am very much of the same kind of opinion that you have. Like, if I have an idea for a character, bang, I have to get it down onto paper, or I have to write it down. And it will only be like a few sentences, like 3 or 4 sentences. But then you've got what I call the foundation of a character, or certainly the character's backstory.
Very much sort of like a plot hook, isn't it? Sort of.
Yeah, very much so. I think that I actually think that's a great way of putting it. It's like before we had our session 0 yesterday for this new campaign that I'm going to be joining as a player, I literally just sat down for 5-10 minutes and I was just like, I know what I want to do. I want to play an archaeologist. So I made sure that I kind of picked a character or I picked a race that I wanted to go with and what would complement that. And
that reminded me a lot of, there was a game we were playing. You remember Nate?
Yes, I remember.
Nate,
I know Nate.
He was running Call of Cthulhu, actually.
Okay.
There's about 4 or 5 of us, and he introduced us to this campaign. He said, okay, so it's set in the 1930s, and you are all sort of subcontracted by the BBC. And one of the guys who actually now is living in America, and we were playing this campaign, and he'd managed to sort of sneak up on this enemy. He put his knife to his throat, and he was like, his killing words were, "We're with the BBC." it was just brilliant. It was a really fun campaign. Call of Cthulhu is brutal as well.
Yeah.
Because it's one of them games where you're not only balancing your physical health, you're having to balance your character's mental health as well. Because obviously you're seeing all this wibbly shit happening all over the place.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
There's a bunch of systems actually that have sort of mechanics like that. I suppose really we should mention one of the things that happens a lot with sort of new players when they're sort of going into role playing is that they have a tendency to give their characters sort of the tragic backstory where they're like, my parents got killed by orcs when I was young and raided my village, and now I've got no one left alive. Became an adventurer and I hate orcs. And
I think that kind of ties in with the kind of thing that I see happen quite a lot as well, where you get somebody that comes in, and especially if they're new to role playing, like you say, they come in with the mentality of like, my character's going to be the hero, and or like they need to the limelight or something like that. And I think it just needs to be, and this is probably part of the session 0s that people regularly have as well, is that it kind of lays the land and you kind of realize that everyone's got their own section of the story. It is just a giant, great big story. And I think with that point that you just brought up, I think that kind of ties in with that ever so slightly. But maybe I think that's just maybe a not knowing what to expect from the game, or like a lack of understanding of what the game maybe is about. That's how I think I usually see that in that kind of instance.
Yeah, it's just something that you have these sort of preconceptions when you start playing that, especially with D&D, the fantasy sort of setting is heavily based around Lord of the Rings. All dwarfs are very surly and Scottish, and this sort of thing. Whereas a lot of the fun characters that I've had have been in D&D or from wherever have just been normal people. Not so much. Maybe they've gone into adventuring because they just come from a poor background, and adventuring is a chance to get them a decent amount of money.
Yeah, he's one of my players when we were running the 5th edition of campaign. He played a paladin. He was the worst paladin I've ever seen anyone play. He was just some bloke that was just like, I'm going to run away. He was falling off of buildings. He was doing everything. But he was just literally a bloke in a suit of armor that for some reason this god kind of liked. It just worked.
Sorry, Richard. If I was a DM, that sentence that you've just said, that would be my my Zeus has banged your mum sort of thing. You know, that is why. But basically, he's a demigod, but he doesn't realise it. So
yeah, it was just literally that's pretty much what was going on with him. I can't remember the god now. I ran the campaign a while back now, but he was just atrocious, and like mostly down to his die rolls. But he leaned into it, and that was so refreshing to see.
It is good to have a cat player who has not played before, but actually you can see it as well. It's brilliant when you get a new player and they start to figure out how the game is played, and you can see it. They almost sort of become their character at the table. Yeah. And it's brilliant when that happens.
Such a nice feeling to see.
I had a player. This was a Dark Heresy campaign that I'd been playing with a couple of, with Nate again and a couple of other players. And we had someone who wanted to join in, so I introduced him, you know, in the campaign, and he wanted to play a sniper, and we had a sniper already on the team. That was Sam actually, and I said, okay, right, so Sam will help you figure out how to do things and what have you. And he was totally unfamiliar with the game system. Like I say, he played D&D a couple of times. He'd not played Dark Heresy. And I remember this session was they tracked this gang down. They'd taken a captive, basically, and they had to try and rescue this guy. And they tracked them down to an abandoned industrial district and this big warehouse. So there were a couple of entrances, and they managed to creep up to it without being detected. And it had a fire escape running up along the outside. And the sniper, Sam, was like, I want to go up to the top. And this new guy was like, yeah, I'll go up with you. And there happened to be a skylight up there. And they could see what was going on down below. They were about 4 or 5 levels up, and they could see this guy being held in the middle, tied to a chair, and these gang members like sort of interrogating him. And then came the words that as a DM, you love it when people say stuff like this.
Absolutely.
And this guy, the new guy, was he was in a prime position. I said to them, you can see everything that's going on down there. You can see everyone. You know where everyone is, and the other guys are all stacking up at the door, sort of ready to sort of breach and make an entrance. And this guy was like, "I want to jump down." So as a DM, so as a DM, you say, you know, when a DM says this, are you sure?
Yeah, you know.
And he was like, "Yeah, I want to jump down."
Yeah.
And obviously, because it was his first time playing, I was like, okay, I'll be a bit easy on him because Dark Heresy is really, you know, brutal. It's not like it's sort of D&D. So you take a long rest and you get your hit points back. So I said to him, okay, yeah, you jump down, roll dexterity for me. And he was like, what do you mean? It's like, just jump 4 floors. And he was like, oh, okay. And he rolled badly, and I was just like, okay, you've broken your ankles. And he spent the entire combat just on the floor. But it was brilliant. It was so funny. He carried on with the game because, like I say, if I'd have killed him off at that point, he would have had, you know, it would have been a bad experience for him. And I didn't want him to sort of quit playing. Can I jump? It's like, yes, you can.
This is the thing as well, though. This is part of the character creation. The whole process is when you play the character throughout the course of the campaign. If you do something stupid, that's part of their history. Yeah, and it's a wonderful thing. Like Roop, who was playing this paladin in my campaign, every single time he would do something like miss an attack or he would hit the wrong person, for example, they would go, "Oh, that's such a Roop thing to do." You know, it would become just like the catchphrase throughout the course of the campaign.
Our characters with catchphrases.
Oh, yeah.
They are both the best thing and the worst thing about characters.
I know, right? I was playing a kobold. It was actually the kobold arcane trickster, and I had a catchphrase where it was "scaly dindins." So if he just saw a fish, he would have to run over to it and eat it, and that was just like his flaw. Whenever he saw a fish, he'd eat it, and I'd just be crying that throughout the course of combat. If I saw like a fish market, for example, I'd run over to the fish, and they'd be like, "What are you doing?" So yeah, it's just it like usually they could be a good thing, mostly they could be a bad thing.
Well, having said that, again, what's your view on accents? Obviously, I don't want to be going into the cultural misappropriation or sort of the almost racist levels of accent. But an accent, I find, I love an accent. I love to try and get an accent in if I'm playing a character.
I love accents, but unfortunately, the only real good accent I'm any good at is a Gollum impression, and that's as bad as I either play the Cockney or I play Gollum. So
why not both?
I do a Cockney Gollum. Split shine your shoes, governor. But I would love to. But I love accents. I've got a player in my campaign, Travis. He loves doing an accent. He is very much the bard of the group. He's not playing a bard, but in terms of players, he is the bard, and he just loves using accents and getting into it. But having said that, like doing the whole voice thing is not for everyone, and that's perfectly acceptable.
I think we should say as well that for newer players, if you don't feel comfortable doing it, especially if it's playing with people that you're new to the group, don't feel like you have to. You're still getting used to the game. It's very much something that it depends on your personality. If you don't want to do it, then don't do it.
Yeah, my wife's been playing for years now, and she still doesn't like doing the voices. She'll still communicate to people as if she's the character, but she won't do the voices, and that's absolutely fine. That's just how some people like to play.
Do you like to have your players, or when you're playing yourself, do you refer to yourself as the character? Do you talk in third person, as it were? Would you say Gollum does this, or would you say I want to do that?
No. I strictly try to refer to everyone, not even just the character that I'm playing, but also everyone around the table as a third person. So if it's somebody's turn, I would say Arcady, for example. That's one of the characters in my campaign. I would refer to Arcady, it's your turn. Or I would say, like, for example, Gollum is going to start walking over or something like that. I think that's all I think that helps part of the immersion, and also it builds some kind of rapport with the characters that you're playing, and also with the other characters that are around the table.
One thing I would recommend, if it's a new character and you've not got used to him, is that you can give yourself like a folded triangle with the player name and the character name on both sides, so the DM and the other players can see what your character name is, because you're not constantly then looking at your sheet or loading up D&DBeyond and going to your player profile and going, okay, that's my detail. If you've got them all there in front of everyone, you're not going, Steve, what's your character called again?
Yeah, it kind of keeps the flow going, as if it's it kind of keeps there's that word again, immersion into it.
I'll definitely do a separate episode on immersion. Is there any other tips or ideas that you would have for newer players or players that are just wanting some extra ideas to put into their characters?
I think it is, don't be afraid to experiment. And whether it be with your ability score rolls or whether it be with the character concept that you have, the one thing I would like to mention is the traits and the bonds and especially in 5e where you've got the bonds and the flaws and the things like that. There are, if you're struggling for certain ideas, there are mentions in the player's handbook where you can roll on a d6 table or you can just choose one of them. And some of those are actually really, really good, but I wouldn't be afraid to just go, just check with your DM and just say, can I use this as a trait or as a bond or as a flaw? And that kind of helps you customize the character to be your own. But even saying that, I mean, I made a character yesterday, literally like the archaeologist that I was telling you about. He's a turtle, and I literally just picked the flaws and the bonds and the different, like, the pros and cons of the character out of the player's handbook, and I was really happy with the result. It was just literally made up on the fly. Don't be afraid to experiment. Go wild. Like, literally, you're only limited by the boundaries of your imagination. So go nuts with it. That's what I would say.
Yeah. I would always also say that, as we've mentioned, that although there are apps there that will help you, there's the player's handbook, which has got it's actually got a couple of pages, doesn't it, in the player's handbook for sort of help create a character at the beginning there. I wouldn't necessarily worry about doing it in that order, because as we've said, sometimes you just come up with something and you're like, you've got like a bard whose thing is juggling, but he's only got one arm, or a priest who's lost his faith,
there's really quirky, oddball ideas that you can come up with, and as you say, you don't necessarily have to do it in order in the book. In fact, I actually find it beneficial not to do it in order in certain aspects.
Yeah,
because you can like pick and choose certain traits and things like that are going to complement your character. Whereas done it in a certain order, you wouldn't have that ability.
Sometimes you find players. I'm not talking about the sort of the rules lawyers who go by. Sort of the rules of that spell's concentration spell, or that sort of thing. I'm thinking now sort of along the lines of alignment.
Yeah.
One thing that is a bit annoying is that in terms of alignment with things like D&D, I would say to sort of err on the side of, as long as it's not wildly breaking away from what your character should be. If you're going to be playing a good character, you shouldn't be going around being a murder hobo.
Yeah, you need to. This is the thing. Like when you make a character, I would say this is the only chance in the game where I would meta game. So if I wanted to optimize a character for like a certain like one shot or campaign or something like that, I would say I would talk with the rest of the party, discuss what I would want to do, and then I would, once I close that player's handbook after I've made the character, that's it. That's the character that I'm playing, especially when it comes to alignment. Like I've chose a lawful good turtle. I will stay within the parameters of being a lawful good character because that's the character that I've created and that's the character that I should be running with throughout the course of this campaign. Like you say, I wouldn't then turn around. Like it would be unfeasible for the character to turn around and stick a shiv inside like the first goblin market stall holder that he would see.
Yeah.
It's just completely
because that's sort of one of those phrases that's become one of the cliches with RP is it's what my character would do.
Yeah, that's it.
And you've got to have a degree of common sense with these things. Say if your character did hate a particular race or a particular religion, if you're surrounded by those priests or something, he's not suicidal. He wouldn't attack them just because they're there. He might hate them.
Yeah.
If he's in a situation, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. He's not daft. Like, so anyone who's got any kind of self-preservation is not going to run into a group of 60 cultists of a god that they hate and stab one of them, because they're just not going to walk away from it. If they hate that religion or if they hate that particular god, then maybe what you would do is, or what your character would do is maybe walk away from it, think about it. That's it. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so anything else?
I do have a really good recording that I've seen here, and ironically I used it earlier on today in a lesson. It's called What Makes a Hero by Matthew Winkler. It's got like a clock kind of diagram. It's a TED Talk. It's a TED Talk
anything
video.
Sort of in sort of how to write. They're really useful as well. If you're writing a book or sort of guides to creating stories and stuff like that, they're really useful for DMs as well. So anything sort of like that is also great. We were talking about that Geek&Sundry article that I mentioned earlier as well.
Oh, yeah, that was really good.
And I like those sort of articles because they're sort of short and punchy. This is what you want to think about when you're creating a character. You want to think, if you've got a character and they're based in a town, then you're not going to create them as a hermit or something, you know.
Exactly,
you want to think of how and why the character does what they do. Thanks very much for speaking to me, Richard, and I'll see you guys soon.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on, Dan. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you, mate.